So, getting into some of the more tactical stuff about Agile development, I want to look at a few things about life cycle models, roles and responsibilities, getting things done, collaboration, stuff like that. So it's 30,000 feet. We're going to go down to 15,000 feet. We might not get down to 3,000 feet, but I want to make it as real as I can. Love to start with the talk about life cycle models. Because I've seen so many, and I've never seen two the same, I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of different life cycle models, and when we're choosing an Agile transition, we're choosing to change our life cycle model. So you've got to look at the pros and the cons of where you're starting, the pros and the cons of where you're going, and especially what's different between the two. So to talk about Agile, it's hard not to talk a little bit about other life cycle models. In the history of software engineering, we've gone through many different types of life cycle models. They're still here to haunt us. They never go away, by the way. Waterfall dating from 1970. Spiral development dating from the 1980s. Structured development starting in the 1980s and still going strong today. And Agile frameworks such as Scrum, Extreme Programming, and Kanban. And there's several. There's dozens of different Agile frameworks. A lot of people equivocate the term Agile with Scrum because Scrum is so pervasive. But there's a lot of choice. There's a lot of variety. Take a quick look. Waterfall is named after the image of a waterfall. It's phased development. It's phased in time. So there's a requirement phase. There's a design phase. There's an implementation phase, a testing phase, a maintenance phase. And very often in these phases, there are people who live in that phase. So they have roles and responsibilities and jobs and departments based on these phases. It's interesting to look at the history of waterfall a little bit because it's still around. And it's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily bad. Let me just take a look. I want to show you something about the origins of waterfall, just a teeny bit here. This is, just to go back, where a lot of people are starting from when you do an Agile transition. So waterfall is, I see, the most common one. And waterfall was first introduced in August of 1970. I cannot believe this thing. Sorry, I'm just having technical problems with the scrolling here. There we go. Dr. Winston Royce, in August of 1970, published an article about waterfall development in the IEEE Westcon Journal in August of 1970. This is the first time waterfall was described publicly in a refereed academic conference. He drew this beautiful picture. So see, that's the reference, 1970 August. This is the picture he drew. When he drew this picture, people started getting very excited. And project managers felt there was a mechanism to manage projects. And they could look at the phases. And if you look at the phases of the waterfall from there, it's almost exactly the same as the phases you see today. And the only point I want to make here is, in waterfall development, it's very expensive if you change the requirements in the middle of the project, right? It's actually, according to IBM Rational, it's between 200 and 400 times more expensive. If the requirements change down here, you have to redo all this stuff. It's a huge cost. And this is, of course, the benefit of almost every Agile method, is that avoid that cost. But if you read the text in this article, the sentence immediately below that, Royce said in August 1970, the implementation described above is risky and invites failure. In fact, he said in August 1970, do not do this, because he prescribed Agile methods in August of 1970, and his exact method that he proposed was this one. Same article, share electronic copy of this with you if you get the Dropbox link. That's the model, he said. Do a little bit of design, a little bit of analysis, a little bit of coding, a little bit of testing, and do that iteratively and incrementally on a feature-by-feature basis, and make sure that usage scenarios are adhered to. So this was actually what Royce proposed. But because people looked at the pictures and got excited about it, they never read the text in the article. People started doing waterfall development, and it's sort of scary, and it goes with the adage, be careful what you write. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but it's not always the words that you intended. Not always the words that you intended. Barry Boehm decided that it would be more productive to do iterative development. A lot of people think this is Agile. There's a misconception among stakeholders today that spiral development is Agile. So you may have stakeholders today that were brought up in the 1980s and 1990s and saw a lot of spiral stuff. So I just want to explain to you the difference. So your stakeholder might think this is what you mean if you say you're going to Agile. In spiral development, you do a little bit of development and you create a prototype to test. Then you do a little development and create a prototype to test. You're always creating prototypes until you finish the product. In Agile development, you're always creating shippable code. So just be careful. I've seen many stakeholders, when they hear about Scrum, they think, oh great, you're going to be doing this. That was popular in the 80s, but today that's not what we mean when we talk about Agile development. Structured development methodologies became popular in the mid-1980s and still used today. RUP, Rational Unified Process, is the most famous one. This is just a very systematic way to develop software, and it has a lot of advantages over Agile development, but a lot of costs. RUP requires over 70 documents to maintain, to keep a product going. RUP divides projects into phases like waterfall, but also into different types of workflows. So phase and workflow, and for every phase and workflow, where they intersect, that's where we see very well-described activities, documentation activities. So if you are following a structured method, you are almost the exact opposite of a self-organized team. But these methods are scalable. You can get up to thousands of people working on them. Agile teams, the most I've ever seen was 24 concurrent teams of about 10 people. The most I've ever seen collaborating is 240 people. I'm sure you can do more. I've never seen it. But with this method, RUP, you can do thousands of developers as part of the method. So this is a huge advantage. Also, remember I told you about your Java programmer who wins the lottery? In RUP, if your Java programmer wins the lottery, you can pick up where you left off without a step. So this is often confused with Agile development. It's very expensive, and it's heavy in documentation. 3 Agile frameworks to talk about specifically. Scrum. Scrum is the most common Agile framework. Scrum is not an acronym. Scrum is a metaphor from the sport of rugby. Because I don't play rugby, I don't really understand 100% what the metaphor is, but you get a bunch of people who get around in a circle, and they call that a scrum, and they advance. So the metaphor is a sports metaphor. I'm not familiar with it. This picture is from the Scrum Alliance. If you want to learn formal descriptions and definitions of Scrum, the Scrum Alliance publishes all this online. They insist that we use this picture when we teach about Scrum because they want everybody to be on the same page. So I want to take a little bit of time, because this is the most popular method, and it's the method that the teams I know who are looking at Agile here are thinking of using, to describe the elements of Scrum using this picture. First thing, these blue boxes on the side here. This is called the product backlog. The product backlog is maintained by a role called the product owner. The product owner is responsible for collecting and managing the requirements of a system. So that's the product owner. So where do the requirements come from? The product owner collects them, gathers them, and puts them in a list called the product backlog. There's a lot of tools, by the way, that are used to manage this these days. Low-tech systems use index cards. More modern systems use tools like Jira, if you're familiar with Jira, or Rally or version 1, or there's plugins for HP's ALM systems. All of these tools have some sort of Agile project management mode, and there's always a place to put a product backlog. The product backlog is not necessarily very detailed. You might have 1 or 2 bullets per entry, and there's a lot of different types of entries, but a very common one is a user story. So you might hear us use the word story a lot when we're talking about Agile development. It's a type of product backlog entry, and a story describes the relationship between a user and a system to get a job done. The user could be a human being, it could be a process, it doesn't always have to be a person, but it's always a relationship between the user and the system to get a job done. So we're not modeling what the software does for the user, we're modeling what the user does for the software with the software. So that's big, big difference from traditional development as regards to requirements. They're very popular, but all requirements do not have to be user stories. It's just that they're very common that they're user stories. They could just be a bulleted list. So in that list, maybe you're creating a product and students get to type in descriptions of things, and you want an undo feature, right? An undo feature sounds useful for some editors. So your requirement might be, enable undo up to the last time a file was saved. That's what your requirement might say. Now, you don't have to phrase that as a user story. You don't have to say who is the user, what do they want to do, and why. You can just say, make an undo feature. So it's up to you how you formulate backlog entries. Eventually, though, the prioritization takes place by the product owner, and some bubble up, right? Some requirements bubble up to the top, and the team negotiates with the product owner to implement some of them in the upcoming iteration. So the subset of the product backlog that the team is committed to implementing is called the sprint backlog. This is using Scrum Alliance terminology. Many companies have their own words for these things, but this product backlog, that's a prioritized list. That's the product owner's baby. The sprint backlog is what the team is committed to. So between something being in the product backlog and something being in the sprint backlog, there's a step where we might detail the requirement more. That's often called a grooming step, where we detail it more. And definitely we estimate it, so we have an idea on how much effort it's going to take. A team will commit to implementing the stories in the sprint backlog. So that's a commitment by the team. When their time-boxed sprint begins, so let's say it's 3 weeks, usually the very first day in the first morning, they have a meeting called a sprint planning meeting. And in that meeting, they look at the elements of the sprint backlog, and they identify tasks. So they actually break down the backlog, sprint backlog entries into the actual tactical work the team will have to do over the next few weeks to get the job done. A task is a chunk of work that can be done by a person. So now keep this in mind. A task is not Fred, Bill, and Jane are going to implement the story. A task is actually the actual elemental work that's done that can be assigned to a person who has the right skills to do it. So a task could be something like implement a stored procedure that queries the attendees based on which faculty they're in. So that would be a task to create that stored procedure. A programmer with the right skills in SQL could do that task. Now, the breakdown of tasks recommended by the Scrum Alliance is between 1 hour and 1 day. That's what they're recommending, the Scrum Alliance. My practical experience is that tasks are usually between 1 hour and 2 days long, with occasional outliers. The outliers being non-functional stuff like performance, security, usability that sometimes take longer. So once in a while you'll get a task that's 4 days or something like that. You might even get a teeny-weeny task once in a while. In mobile development, I've heard of some things that take only 15 minutes to do. But for the most part, we're fishing for a granularity between like 1 hour and 2 days. So if your tasks are all 4 days long, you probably got to break them down. If your tasks are all 30 minutes, you should probably combine them together. So once this task list is prepared, the team starts their job. So the planning meeting can take anywhere from a couple of hours to almost a whole day sometimes. It depends on how many unknowns you have. So the team tries to get a very complete list of tasks. That might take longer sometimes, but once you're organized and working for a few sprints together, you'll probably get that done in a couple of hours. Every day starts off with a kickoff meeting. This is part of what you were calling the rituals of Scrum. By the way, that planning meeting is also a ritual of Scrum. So the stand-up meeting is supposed to take a few minutes. If it takes a long time, you're not following Scrum. So people who complain we do too many stand-up meetings, probably because they're having huge discussions. So in the stand-up meeting in Scrum, you're supposed to discuss very simply the tasks. And the Scrum Master, the facilitator, asks everybody in the team what tasks they've completed, what tasks are in progress, and are there any impediments. So part of the rituals of a Scrum team is to have every day what they call a daily stand-up meeting. And they're usually quite short, not hours, not half hours, 10 minutes maybe. And you're basically just getting in sync about what everyone else is working on. You're not trying to solve all the problems, you're trying to make sure we're in sync. And the team continues throughout the sprint. Here it says 30 days, but that's whatever your length is, if you continue, your team has a done checklist that's already been created. The product owner and the team agrees on it. At the end of the sprint, you have finished the sprint backlog entries, and they're in a state which is potentially shippable. In Scrum, we don't have to ship after every sprint, but there should be no more software engineering work required. There may be DevOps deployment work required, but the software development part should be, or is expected to be, over. So that's the elements of Scrum. Yep. Shippable. All the testing activities would have been done in the sprint. So these list of tasks include traditional documentation tasks, traditional testing tasks, traditional programming tasks, traditional analysis tasks, whatever you normally would do, they get put in. So you see you're doing a very small story, but all the way through. So that's the model. So that's also sometimes very hard if in waterfall projects you've broken it down differently. So here we're breaking it down into little features or little stories. And when we do that story, we do the whole vertical slice.
So what do you recommend for a stand-up meeting, right? I know that's a pain point too sometimes.
Well, sometimes rituals are pain points, yeah.
So if it's an issue that goes longer than 15 minutes, I've been in Scrums that have been 15
Yeah.
minutes.
So I'm not a very good facilitator of Scrum meetings. Partially, and I never claimed to be. I'm very bad at it because I like to have people leaving with satisfaction that we've solved the problem. And a good Scrum Master is going to balance the dialogue. And when, hey, we're all here, well, let's just discuss it a bit. But we don't want everybody to waste their time. So the Scrum Master learns how to make the trade-offs on that. And that's why they're usually very highly specialized training to become a Scrum Master. Because you're not an expert in any one of the technologies. But you sort of got to know when to say, hey guys, you three, why don't you go talk about that offline? That's great, we're happy you're getting together. Everyone else, we can get about our work. So the Scrum Master's got to be careful about that. And I certainly have audited a lot of stand-up meetings that are weird. But I can't tell, as an external auditor, I can't tell if we're all here, maybe we've talked about everything you and you care about, and I don't know to dismiss you from the room. I don't know that. So a healthy team goes through the ritual, doesn't waste a lot of time, but maybe once in a while, it does make sense for you to spend a half hour jamming about things. But if it's every day, it's a long, silly thing. Well, that's not the point. The point of the meeting is to be in sync, and then if we have to have an activity saying.
I was curious if looking at that, should that be broken into more granular?
Well, the facilitator is supposed to note that, wait a sec, only 3 people are engaged in this, and the rest of the team has enough knowledge now. So you 3 take that offline, work on that. And the Scrum Master is trained to make that balance, because a short jam about architecture might make a lot of sense. But if it's sort of getting into a meeting of its own that's not benefiting the team, the Scrum Master is supposed to have the discussion, but do it offline, to move it out of the meeting. And as I said, that's not something I've exactly been trained in. I've coordinated and facilitated lots of stuff in my careers, and I'm still amazed at how beautifully some Scrum Masters can manage groups of people. I would have gotten engaged in the discussion sometimes. So that's my fault. Yep. Product owners, business. What team, it depends on your organization. Big mistakes people make with product owners is they bring in someone from marketing or something to be a product owner. Marketing people are very good at marketing products. That doesn't mean they're good at prioritizing requirements, right? Marketing includes promotion and stuff like that. And so I've seen that mistake done. Marketing people become product owners, they don't know how to prioritize things. If a product owner can't be found, If you can't find a single person, some teams set up a little small a council of advisors to the product owner. So some product owners need guidance about complicated business rules, so they might have a BA or two working with them. They might need guidance on architecture, so they might have a product architect guru helping them, a little council that they consult with. I've seen that at universities, by the way. University of Athabasca does that. And they actually use also, by the way, Banner, if anyone's interested in. Well, the product owner prioritizes the requirements, so they have to capture the requirements. I don't think they define the requirements. They don't make up the requirements. They collect them, right? Requirements don't, the product owner doesn't make up the requirements, but they, yeah, they know the business and they know the relative priority of the stuff from the business perspective. It has to be someone savvy in the business of this thing. That's the point in Scrum. And sometimes it's hard to find that person. That's why I said sometimes you need some advisors to help with it. But the goal is a single person. There's two more. So this is the most common one, but there's two more Agile frameworks I just want to show you. So this is the most common one. There's extreme programming, very technical, small teams just like Scrum. Here we have the 4 core practices here. Pair programming. You always have 2 developers working together all the time, always, which is hard to do, by the way. Simple architecture, they're big on emergent architecture. No architecture up front. The simplest design to get the job done, that's all. They do test-driven development, which means that every single line of code, they've created the unit test for the code before they write the code, always, rigorously. And after we've added a new feature, we always refactor, we always look for the emergent architecture. This I've seen done twice. So I've been at this for a long time. It probably dates from about 92, this method. The 2 times I've seen it, it's highly technical people doing systems without any user interface. In other words, embedded software in switches, like video switches at British Broadcasting System in England, stuff like that. So it's usually very technical things. But once in a while, you have a project, and you say, hey, there's a bunch of technical people who have to solve a very complex technical problem. Maybe extreme programming would work better for that group than Scrum. Kanban is also something that has a huge amount of energy. Anyone here practice Kanban? You've seen that. So Kanban is an agile method that derives from things like the Toyota quality model, what they call lean development. You're going to see a lot of articles that say, hey, Kanban is great. What happens in Kanban is you set up a big board called a Kanban board, and then you define columns for the common activities you would do to fulfill a requirement. So in this case, they do analysis, development, acceptance, testing, and deployment to production. If every requirement you're doing has a similar path through it, Kanban might make a lot of sense. And what Kanban will do, so mechanically, you'll put your requirements here, then they move into the analysis phase. Once analysis is done, they move there. So the cards are always moving from left to right across, and when a card gets to the right, an individual card gets to the right, it can be deployed. Scrum, you wait for the whole iteration to have something that's deployed. Here, it's when a card works its way across, it can be deployed. It's very different from Scrum. Where this comes up, and where you probably will see this at UPenn, is your Scrum team, once you get going after several iterations, you're going to find you have field-supported bugs that need urgent support. What many Agile teams will do is they'll take, if there's 10 people, they'll take 2 of those people, and they'll say, for the next month, you're handling all the issues from the outside world, and the other 8 people, you're all working on the new development, and for the new development, we're going to use pure, clean Scrum, but for these field-reported issues, we're going to use Kanban. And when we start a new sprint, we merge the thing in. So this is, they say, the best of both worlds. Kanban is great for support issues. It's actually not great. It's less efficient than Scrum because you end up deploying after everything makes it through. So it actually gets expensive. Kanban is modeled after the what they call the Toyota quality model. And what happens is that in the auto industry, they try to minimize inventories of parts. Here we try to minimize inventories of how many things are in a column. So you see you put a number at the top, your team self-organizes to figure out what that number is. But this number is 3. That means that there's never more than 3 activities in this column. So once I've got 3, I have to move one out before I move another one in. So we never have more than 3. And this motivates the team to move things along. Before you start implementing a new feature, you finish the old feature. So that's the nuance of Kanban. Good for support. Good for support.
Yeah, we had that.
To back up this, we in the Scrum also you kind of follow this table that you say you put the stories here, the user stories here, and you say start, in progress, impediment.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So the one beautiful confusion we have is that there's actually a board that's used in Scrum called a task board. And the task board looks almost the same like a Kanban board. But the task board doesn't have the columns with limiting numbers. So, okay, so physically, you have these big low-tech task boards on walls with all the cards, and they color code them exactly. So it looks like a Kanban board, but it's not. It's to track tasks. Here we're tracking requirements from left to right. When we're doing Agile development, we try to do incremental development, which means that every time we implement a new feature or a new story or a new requirement, we try to do all of the activities, so all the tasks, right, to handle the presentation layer, service layer, business layer, and data layer. So this is different from the way a lot of organizations, like UPenn, for example, might organize work. I heard all sorts of things about there's a data warehousing department somewhere. Somewhere in this city, there's a bunch of people who love data warehouses. And they do probably a lot of the data layer work on a lot of things. Well, if you wanted to go to Scrum, you'd want to get some of that in the actual development team. I don't know if politically this is possible, right? So you might have to violate some of the Scrum approaches. But in a Scrum team, almost always you have all the skills needed to do a thin vertical slice. So every feature has a little bit of the presentation layer, a little bit of the service layer, a little bit of the business logic, a little bit of the data layer. And that's called a thin vertical slice through all the technology layers. A GUI, user interface GUI, anything that would be used to control or observe the process. It could be a mainframe terminal, a batch process, could be a message. But usually this is called, these are the layers of a multi-tiered architecture, so that's why we use these terms. Most systems have some sort of presentation layer, most systems have some sort of service layer, most systems have some sort of business logic, most systems have some sort of data layer, but sometimes they're morphed together. Like sometimes the service layer and the presentation layer are morphed together. For today, we have web service applications that don't have a user interface, but they have that interface. It's a messaging interface, so it's like almost like the service layer. So this is just a more common case. So to compare and contrast, in Agile transition, it's good to note what happens. Traditional development, siloed teams. That's why I think it's important to reflect on why we had siloed teams, because of the waterfall, which Royce said was bogus, right? So a development team, a testing team, a product management team, a documentation team, a project management team. These are good teams. This is a great way to go things. That's the PMO. It's good. Nothing wrong with that. However, in Agile, they favor small, self-organized teams with very few roles. And you will see that people would say in an Agile team, we have a role of a Scrum Master, a role of a product owner, and a role of a team member. That team member, of course, has different skills and experience, and maybe someone who has a lot of Java programming expertise or a lot of testing expertise, but we don't give them like a job title based on their technical skill set. Big difference, right? And this is where you get into pure Agile. So this is dogma. Agile dogma would suggest that there are no testers in a Scrum team. But if you step off that soapbox, Agile practices, of course there's specialists in testing in Scrum teams. It's just that they're not the only people who do testing, and they don't only do testing. People do things they have skills to do. And many people have skills beyond just their normal traditional siloed role. If we didn't do that type of work breakdown, it would be very hard to distribute the work across a sprint, across an iteration of development. break down the task so that other people can do it, not just you.
Just a quick question. In Agile, should a developer be testing, aside from unit testing, their own work?
Well, aside from unit testing, it's not really considered a good practice. But a developer, if they have testing skills, can test other people's work.
Yes.
If they have testing skills. Not all developers have testing skills. Certainly there's an issue of objectivity, and whenever you're testing your own code, you tend to test the code to see if the code did what you programmed it to do, not does it do what it should do. And that's a tunnel vision that would happen to anyone, no matter how skilled you are at development. But you're right, unit testing, that's where we see a lot of work. And why not paired unit testing? Why not, before you finish the code, while you're in the sandbox, pair with someone. So the Java programmer and the testing person pair together in the IDE and do some testing before the code is checked in. So that's a type of testing I want the developer to do around the time of unit testing, before they check in the code, but paired with someone. That's an awesome practice. Also, you see other things out of the comfort zone. People with testing skills in traditional projects, they don't do debugging and troubleshooting. In Agile teams, they will very often do debugging and troubleshooting with the programmer. They will use the IDE and the debugger. And that takes a lot of testers way out of their comfort zone. But it's really cool, because you'll find that people with testing experience have actually got great skills in doing that. They just never were asked to do it before. How do you troubleshoot this bug? Well, if you pair with a programmer, you probably can really do the job very efficiently. So it's out of your comfort zone, right? Okay, so this is it. The traditional stuff, delineation of roles, encouraging centers of excellence, and in Agile, small, self-organizing, adaptable things. That's where we're looking. Programmers have fewer documents. If your programmer is used to having a requirement document, a design document, an architectural specification, a functional specification before they write the code, they're going to find themselves with very little documentation. They'll have some. They'll have a description of the feature. They'll have a description of the acceptance criteria of it. But they probably won't have a use case analysis or something done a priori. So developers are often out of their comfort zones. Testers are often out of their comfort zones too, because there's such simple things like, while you're testing, you have no document to reference to assess correctness. So people have to figure out other strategies to assess correctness on the fly as they're testing. And this is a very different skill. It's not saying that we don't design tests. We do design tests, but we very often design tests just before we test them. So we don't design tests in advance in an earlier phase, but we still design tests. We just do it at the time of our testing. Very often in an Agile team, you'll do the test design and execution in a tight loop. And there's also a lot more automation in Agile teams because there's a focus on regression testing. Because if we're going to ship at the end of the sprint, we need to have that regression confidence that we didn't accidentally break something. The Scrum Master role, this role doesn't exist in traditional development. So this is a facilitator. His job is to coordinate with other teams. So even though your small Scrum team self-organizes among yourself, who's going to go and deal with the other teams, and there's a lot of other teams in this university, that's the Scrum Master's job, to coordinate with other teams, to set up the protocols and practices with other administrative or organizational factors outside of the Scrum team. They're supposed to remove obstacles. Those are the impedances, and that's what you were saying in the dashboard. Sometimes they'll have a list of what are the impediments so that the Scrum Master can actively get them out of the way. Asking about product owners. Bob Galen, beautiful book on the subject, if you're interested in a beautiful treatment of the role of product owner. He says it's a single person responsible for business decision making. Anytime the team has to make a business-related trade-off, anytime. The most common ones are prioritization of requirements, but it's also deciding about things like what bugs should we fix, what bugs shouldn't we fix, scoping our work. That becomes the product owner's responsibility. It's sort of like we want to have that single person that we can sort of count on when we have to make a trade-off. Who is that person who's going to make it? And that's the product owner. The best product owners I've ever seen are actual owners of companies who have their skin really in the game, and if the company fails, they're going to lose money. I mean, there's some people who really, really are engaged in the prioritization of things. They manage the product backlog. If you have product development, some Agile teams create what are called release plans, which are just thematic relationships of features over time. In Q1, we're going to do the student enrollment. In Q2, we're going to do the, scheduling. In Q3, we're going to do some other feature. So I have thematic release plans. Establish acceptance criteria. So it's not just the story or the requirement, it's also what's the acceptance criteria about it. And if the product owner doesn't know it themselves, they've got to get the information. They've got to get the analysts. They've got to get the customers to give them this information. Ultimately, they decide which entries are implemented. They prioritize the backlog entries. If the product owner doesn't want it implemented, it's not going to get implemented. It's not an arbitrary decision by the team. And as I said, make trade-offs and decides about what's good enough. So what bugs are acceptable, what bugs are unacceptable. If the team is trying to figure out, should we ship with this bug or not, well, it's the product owner who makes those decisions. Tasks, the actual technical work, it breaks with tradition. We focus on skills. So a task should be written in such a way that everyone on the team knows what sort of skills you need to do the task. And if you have the skills, you do the task. So the task is done if you have the skills. If you don't have the skills, don't do the task. So I talk about testing all the time. Some people think anybody can test. I'm sorry. Testing skills take years and years to hone, and they're very complex skills. It's applied discrete mathematics. It's a very tricky field to be in. So if you don't have test design skills, don't go and say, I'm going to test this feature. So take it only if you have the skills. Yes, sir.
When they describe a task, sometimes they say given, then. Given this, when you supply this input, then this.
Yeah, and they call that the given, when, then triad. And we see that a lot in acceptance testing, especially in Agile development.
Even in the task, when you are defining a task, write it in a way.
So given this happens, then you do this with this expected outcome.
When this is input,
Yeah,
then this is the output.
that's good. That's a cool idea. So the job, get the thing done, right? So requirements, this is the biggest difference. So someone asked about, can I talk a little more about requirements? This is the biggest difference between traditional development and Agile development. Here, in traditional development, we have big, complicated requirement documents, which are very expensive to prepare, and everything relates to everything else. In Agile development, we don't look at requirements with the same model at all. So it's not a collection that we committed to here. It's actually an evolving backlog. It's a queue. And that queue is always getting new things shoveled into it, and it's always being reprioritized. So some things are moving up, some things are moving down. Sometimes the product owner will find out there's an emergency requirement, we have to implement it right away. Well, that'll get prioritized, so it'll be the first thing in the next sprint that we do. We don't interrupt a sprint in progress, not in Agile development. You'd have to cancel the sprint to do that. But the product owner will almost always reprioritize the backlog so that what's important for the business gets done at the beginning of the next sprint. There's a lot of things in the backlog. They could be traditional feature type of requirements. They could be constraints like what operating system it works with, how much memory the machine has. And it could be user stories, which is a type of requirement which shows the relationship between a user and a job, usually described with the terms, who is the user, what do they want to do, and why. Who is the user, what do they want to do, and why. So that's a user story. It's called a Cohen style, if you want. There's a lot of different styles for user stories. It's very common. We expect the requirements to change. So we do not get romantically attached to the product backlog. The sprint backlog, we committed to doing, that we're going to do. But the rest of the product backlog, it could change dramatically. Unit testing, someone mentioned about unit testing before. Unit testing is almost exactly the same in traditional development and Agile development. There's hardly any change to unit testing. However, there's a couple of practices like TDD, test-driven development, which are more commonly used in Agile, where you write the tests before you write the code. And there's certainly paired programming if you're doing extreme programming, so that changes a little bit how you do some of the unit testing. But for the most part, people use NUnit frameworks like JUnit or CUnit, or depending on your technology stack, whatever unit you use. And these frameworks are tied to your build system so that you can repeat your unit tests on a build-by-build basis to get structural regression confidence. And it's pretty much the same in traditional development or Agile development, so it's not much change in unit testing. But integration testing, there's a huge change. In Agile development, we tend to do a continuous integration, which means as we add new features, we integrate them into the product as soon as we can. We don't wait for a phase to do that. So for features, we integrate them as soon as we can, as soon as they're ready. If you have system level integration, which is not mentioned on this slide, if you have system integration, some people have a type of a story in the backlog called an integration story, which talks about how different systems have to collaborate to get a job done. So it's an integration story. It's not a feature story, it's an integration story. So for system level integration, you have integration stories that some people use. I have a case study in my Dropbox that if you send me the email, I'll send you the link to it, that is actually about that. It's called the Acme Corporation, which sounds like it might be relevant for a lot of projects over here that do system level integration. Yep.
Does that work if not all the teams are agile at the same time? Moving that way?
Project, it's going to be painful across projects if people aren't synchronized, but whether they're agile or not, if they have to integrate, they have to integrate. So your teams have to figure out how to collaborate, and it's going to be a constraint for one team or the other. Usually, if everybody's using some sort of agile, then what you'll do is you'll do a sprint of regular development, a sprint of regular development, a sprint of regular development, and then you might have a sprint that we're going to integrate with someone else's thing, so you can synchronize. If one is using waterfall and one is using agile, it's a little trickier to find that point to synchronize. But still, no matter what life cycle, you still have to figure out a point to synchronize. So if everyone's using Scrum, it's sort of nice because you've got these iterations going on, and then you can sort of say, okay, every 3 iteration, we're going to do an integration activity. Or every 2 iterations, we're going to do an integration activity across systems. And that works very nicely. But if there's hybrid models, you got to find the point. And right now, you already have that. You already have hybrid models. Everybody's doing sort of different development. So if they synchronize, they still have to figure out when is a good time to do it. If you're using Scrum, you're going to want to do it. You'll talk about sprints. So you'll say, we want to do this in the next sprint or something. It's going to be something that also the product owner has to prioritize. Because an integration story might not say it's adding a lot of features, but it takes a lot of work, right? And so it takes capacity, it takes effort from the team. So it has to be prioritized and traded off with the product owner. Because that sprint, you're not going to be adding new features. You're going to be integrating with other people's stuff. So that's integration, very different. System testing, huge difference. In Agile development, we don't have system testing phases, but in the sprint, when we do the work, we do the tasks related to system testing. So we'll do a little bit of functional testing, a little bit of non-functional testing, a little bit of failure mode testing, a little bit of exploratory testing, a little bit of regression testing. Whatever we're going to be doing all of the activities from system testing, but it's going to be in the sprint, not in a separate phase. Some organizations take a long time to get to this point. I've seen it take up to 3 years. So if you can't do this in a sprint, you might rely on occasionally having an extra sprint, which people call a hybrid, an Agile hybrid called a Scrum butt. We're doing Scrum, but once in a while we have to do an extra sprint to test. That's considered a violation of the dogma, but if you're doing a transition, it might be required while you're trying to get to the case of doing everything in the sprint. Acceptance testing in traditional development is often a phase. In Agile development, it's a way of life. Every single requirement has acceptance tests before we commit to implementing them. This is frankly a very beautiful thing. If someone can't give me the acceptance test for a requirement, I'm not going to even estimate how much time it takes to do it. The effort, the onus is on the product owner to give you requirements which have clear acceptance tests. Very often, Agile teams, though, elicit these acceptance tests. So even though the product owner or the BA has the information, they might not know how to express it. So Agile teams have meetings called grooming sessions, and that term in Europe is considered offensive by some people, so some people call it preparation meetings. I don't want to I don't want to suggest one thing or another. The term that's used by the Scrum Alliance is grooming still, so there's a politically correct word, I think, called preparation. But what you'll do is invest a little bit of time every week in grooming stories that are getting higher priority in the product backlog. Agile teams have a definition of done. They've agreed with the product owner. So your Agile team and your product owner have agreed on what done means. And generally, done means fully analyzed. There's no more analysis. There's no more design. There's no more coding. There's no more testing. There's no more architecture. There's no more integration. And we've demonstrated everything that we've done. Done means shippable. That's what you're laughing at this.
Because I've got that written on my whiteboard because it makes me crazy when people say it's done and it's not in production.
Yeah. So the Agile team has a commitment. The Agile team has a commitment to the product owner.
Yeah.
It can go to production. And I urge you to spend a lot of time working on a definition of done so that everyone in the team and the product owner are in sync about this. It can make or break an Agile team. Done is tricky. I have in the Dropbox, I have actual examples from commercial projects of done checklists. They can be quite extensive, but they're things that the team wants every team member. So if one person says the story's done and another person says a different story's done, we have the same confidence in its readiness to be deployed to production. So this list may take you a long time to get to this point, but if you have only 3 things you agree to, then agree to that, and as you go, as you get better, add more to the list. So there's some rituals. You're talking about rituals. People get caught up on rituals in Agile development. There's the ritual of backlog grooming. That's to basically prepare requirements. Backlog grooming, teams will often do this once a week. So you invest a little bit of time every week to improve upcoming requirements. And these are requirements that we're going to be doing 1 or 2 sprints in the future. So a few sprints in advance. There's a sprint planning meeting. This takes place at the very beginning of the sprint, usually the first few hours, where we break down the stories we've committed to doing into tasks. There's a ritual called the daily stand-up meeting, where the team actually has a session every day where they look at the tasks. The Scrum Master asks what tasks were done, what tasks are in progress, what are the impediments. So that's a daily stand-up. At the end of the sprint, we have a demo. So the demo is a ritual where we basically show to our product owner and other stakeholders what we've done. We demonstrate the features that we've implemented. And the other ritual that's very important is the retrospective, where we take a look at how we can improve what we're doing. So this is the reorganization, tweak the things a bit, improve whatever has to be improved. So these are common rituals in Scrum. There's points where we collaborate with others all over the place, so we're not alone. We don't work in isolation. We elicit stories. This would be done, elicit stories from the product owner, maybe in grooming, perhaps. Grooming activities, user feedback. We want to, all over the anytime the user experience changes, we want feedback from the users. Users are not necessarily the customers. People always talk about customers. I view as the customer as someone who pays for software. The user is someone who uses software. So it's 2 different roles. Sometimes it's wrapped in one in some organizations. But I want to get user feedback whenever we change the user experience. If I'm doing test-driven development, programmers are not necessarily gifted test designers, so there's an opportunity to collaborate between people with testing skills and people with programming skills before they start doing TDD to identify the tests. Programmers are very often weak at test design. I'm not saying you do the testing for them. That unit testing is a programming activity. But if we're trying to get something that's done at the end of the sprint, it couldn't help to have someone with test design experience brainstorm with the programmer for a half hour before they start doing their TDD. Test writing for story testing. Story testing, it sounds like a fantasy thing you do in Disneyland, right? Story testing. Story tests is a synonym for the acceptance test of a requirement. So a story test is running the acceptance test of a story. That's why they call it a story test. And writing story tests is an opportunity for people who know what the test goal is and know how to describe it to work together. Very often, the person who knows what the requirement is, knows what the acceptance requirement is, has no skills in expressing it. So we have to go to the School of Dentistry and learn how to extract that. from people. Don't go to the School of Dentistry. That's a joke.
Listening stories with learning, that's a whole, I mean, it's kind of like everything is the whole team. Like, that's not just the Scrum Master with the product owner.
People do it a lot of different ways, but usually I see it done with the whole team. Let me share with you an example. So, this is an audited grooming session from a company in the Pacific Northwest. This is how they do it. Now you choose, your team self-organizes, right? So you don't necessarily need to do it this way. You can do it differently. But just to show you what the team looks like here. So every Tuesday afternoon, the Scrum team holds a backlog grooming session. The team reviews high priority stories being considered for future sprints. The team has 4 reasons to groom stories. That's what they do, 4 things. First, they attempt to gain a common understanding of work in the pipeline. They help to clarify new story descriptions. They get meaningful examples to be used as acceptance tests. And they estimate the effort required for each story. Those are the 4 things the team does in a grooming session. Grooming meetings were time-boxed. So this company time-boxes them to 90 minutes. They go for 90 minutes. They don't go until they finish. They go for 90 minutes. They invest 90 minutes a week in grooming. Attending were, in this case, the product owner, BA, 4 developers, 2 testers, a technical writer, and a Scrum Master. The BA and the product owner authored the story descriptions, and the BA acted as a facilitator. So this was, to the best of my knowledge, the entire team. So every week, 90 minutes, the entire team got together, and they groomed stories given by the product owner. The meeting started out with a short 5-minute team building exercise designed to break the ice and get everyone talking to encourage participation by all. It's like showing a video of cat herding. The business analyst used the PowerPoint presentation to walk through new stories one at a time. In this particular meeting, 4 stories were groomed. That's just what happened that meeting. One of the stories was a new complex business rule added to existing transactions. It was read out loud by the BA in the style, who is the user, what does the user want, and how. That's called the Cohen style. Team members asked plenty of domain-specific questions, uncovering potential ambiguity and risky misinterpretation. The team compared and contrasted the new story with existing functionalities. The BA edited the description as the team discussed clarifications. Some edits added acceptance tests in the form of examples. Other edits clarified the statement of the story. The BA always called on the authority of the product owner to confirm changes. The changes were made on the fly in the grooming session. The team used planning poker. This is an estimation technique to estimate the size of the story. It took 3 rounds to achieve consensus. During each round, team members justified high and low estimates using persuasive arguments. A couple of the stories were very similar to previous ones. The team walked through them quickly. Very little time was spent discussing them. And in both cases, estimation required only 1 round of planning poker, and the team agreed based on common shared experience. This is nice to see. Similar to things they've done in the past, they did it, groomed it quickly, estimated it quickly. One of the stories was quite foreign to the team and raised many questions. It turned out the BA and the product owner didn't have answers for the clarifying questions. And during the meeting, the product owner and the BA unsuccessfully attempted to split up the story. The story was pulled from grooming. The product owner and the BA would need to rework the story before subsequent grooming. And I love this. You don't start implementing it if you can't groom it, right? You don't accept it. You don't estimate it. If it can't be groomed, you can't do that. At the end of the meeting, the BA summarized the work accomplished and indicated that the stories will be added to the product backlog for a future sprint. So that's sort of the flavor of a grooming session, but it's up to your team to self-organize and figure out, I like to see everyone there. I like to see the whole team there because I like to get the buy-in on what's coming down the pipeline. I don't want it to be a shock in that planning meeting to see what the stories are that we're going to be implementing. So I'm a sort of big fan of having the whole team there, but I want to limit the amount of time and effort. 1 hour once a week for me is fine. I'd like that hour to be at lunchtime. I'd like the product owner to pay for the pizza. It's like, I want something that's fun in the culture.
There's no budget, sorry. Bring your lunch.
If you can get the budget to do that. I'm thinking of Silicon Valley, they feed everybody stuff.
Yeah, they don't. Only the high.
But just your kids get,
Seniors
huh? Yeah. So let's see. So other things, other collaboration points, so that was about an answer to your question. I love answering a question that way, by the way. It's sort of fun for me to share an example rather than saying what you should do. This is what they did do. Collaboration, we do paired exploratory testing a lot, especially sometimes pairing with subject matter experts, pairing with end users, pairing with test domain experts. Debugging and troubleshooting, people who are traditional testers will work with programmers to debug and troubleshoot things. In waterfall, this is often discouraged. In fact, there's some people who say that testing is not debugging and make big speeches about it. Don't get caught up on debugging. Well, in Agile teams, it's actually encouraged. People do reviews, peer reviews, a lot of informal peer reviews going on. Sometimes there's a policy where you check in code or check in anything. You always have to have two sets of eyes. So anything that ever gets checked in, you do an informal peer review. This is very common. Demo and retrospective, we said, those are collaboration points at the end of the sprint. So that's the story of 15,000 feet view. I want to share a few case studies, just quick ones. They're called lightning talks. Each one actually takes only a few minutes to go through, but they're real experiences that really happen. And the first one we call the case of the week pilot. The case of the week pilot. This took place in the town of Cedar Rapids in Iowa? Is it Iowa? Do you know that Cedar Rapids? No, it's Iowa. It really exists. Does anyone ever been there? It's not a fantasy. A lot of people think this town is a fantasy town, that Cedar Rapids, because there was a movie made called Cedar Rapids and people think it was a fantasy town. And just because it's a couple of blocks from the Field of Dreams and just one town over from where James Tiberius Kirk was born, it doesn't mean it's a fantasy town. No, Cedar Rapids is very real, and that's the heart of a lot of Iowa, thank you. It's the heart of a lot of educational software development in the States, in Cedar Rapids. So I was there helping with this team figure out what was wrong with their Agile transition. My job, the consultant, look under the hood, right? So they were trying to basically react better to changes in their business. They had a very big presence in the business world, in their business, but a lot of competition in local markets was eating into it, and they had a lot of trouble reacting. Like imagine there's 4 guys in Philadelphia in a garage writing software, and a big company in Cedar Rapids developing software, and the big company in Cedar Rapids has 200 people to get a release done. Those 4 guys in the garage just have 4 guys in the garage. They're a lot faster in the garage. But the guys in Cedar Rapids, they're dealing with every state and every city and everyone's rules. The garage is only dealing with the rules of one place in Philadelphia. So there was a big stress because of local competition, local markets. So to recover from that, their salespeople were over-promising and the development teams were under-delivering. Under-delivering and over-promising are correlated, by the way. It's just, I've never seen one without the others. If you under-promise, you don't over-deliver. Like it's a funny thing. There were lots of small teams with a strong independent testing team, really strong traditional independent testing team, and one corporate Scrum champion in the organization. So what they did, they wanted to do Scrum. They got this one champion, that one guy, convinced the high-level management to try Scrum out, arguing that they could solve all these problems. So they chose a project, and they found a project that could fail. I want you to just listen carefully. They found a project that didn't matter if it failed. Have you ever seen that in your life, that a company actually has a project that could fail and it doesn't matter? Like, I would cancel that project right away and do something else. But they found one. They assigned team members to it. They gave them some basic training in Scrum, a little more than this, but not much, more than this morning. And these guys ran with it. The testers were a physically separate team. Every time they found a bug, they entered it in 2 different bug tracking systems at the same time. One for the testers, one for the developers. The product owner was distracted by the things, and the project didn't matter anyhow, so the product owner was just always doing something else. The team was interrupted by support issues every day, and no one was motivated to work on the project because the support issues were always more important. The Scrum Master was also a developer, so he was trying to facilitate everybody but write all the code at the same time. Didn't work too good. You laughed at that one. Tester got stuff too late. There was no progress on automation. And they had to rely on these extra testing iterations. They call them hardening iterations very frequently. So the remedy, well, I did detailed task analysis. I looked under the hood. I watched, what was really bugging them, what was the critical path of their system. I tried to show them how to eliminate the redundant bug tracking system. That was killing them. The two bug tracking systems were actually not synchronized. They were not parallel and didn't even include the same amount of detail. So a developer could legitimately and honestly think that they fixed a bug based on one description, but not from the other description. It was totally incongruent. Let's see. I suggested that they get more active. So testers and developers work in close quarters, closer than they had. They physically separate, different equipment, different teams. Active product owner, find someone, and if the product owner is distracted, get someone who can be seconded in there, like have an assistant product owner or something. Allocate support issues separately from new features, somehow manage that. Get the testers engaged and involved in planning, because the testers at the time were not involved in the planning meetings, it was just the programmers. And put testability stuff in the product backlog. The team is allowed to put things in the backlog. The product owner prioritizes it, but the team can put stuff in the product backlog. And in the end, so this first project failed. They came back with, these guys, they came back with 4 new pilots, and they learned from them how to do Agile. And now they are a company that does their main product development with a waterfall model, but all the regional variations are with Scrum. So they actually do have a hybrid that blends Agile and Scrum, and it's a model that probably is not far from what eventually I think UPenn will come up with. The second one, out of the frying pan into the fire. So they wanted to respond to market pressure without destroying ongoing projects. This was crazy. I walk in the door, I try to understand what's going on there, and no one's finishing anything. Because anytime you start to finish one feature in one project, some other emergency comes by, pulls you off of it, and you never get the first thing done. And so this was basically ridiculous. So the president of the company wanted to be able to respond to market pressure without destroying ongoing projects. Before, testing was heavily scripted, done only by subject matter experts, which I think is basically a big mistake in software testing. I think if you're all subject matter expert testers, you're missing a lot of opportunities. I'm not saying there shouldn't be some subject matter expertise in testing, but here, that's all they were. Like, you weren't allowed in the testing team unless you were a domain expert. There was no one who was really a test design expert in there. And they had all the testers were an independent team, not working directly with the programmers. In development, emergency, emergency, emergency. The developers were knights in shining armor, and they loved it. The programmers loved it. I want to tell you, there's 2 ways to deal with this interruption stuff. One way is, I hate it, it's not letting me finish something. Or one is, I love it because I get to be the hero. These guys got to be the hero, and they really had this hero culture. And they're sort of waiting for the next crisis so they could be the hero. You should have seen my report. So the developers also loved documentation. They had 7 layers of documentation. If you want to talk about developers with lots of paperwork, they loved it. They were good at it. I actually have somewhere in my notes the list of the names of the documents. There was tons of integration testing before the testing team got it. This is what we call fake testing teams, where one team does something, and then sort of another team tests it before we give it to the real testing team. So you have sort of like this hidden testing teams that the management didn't know about what was going on. And unit testing was inconsistent, by the way. Every developer had their own view of how much unit testing was needed. Now you're going to love this one, for product management. They had basically multiple requirement lists. I discovered multiple requirement lists that were all different for the same product. And I couldn't believe this, There was also this whole consensus management thing where we weren't allowed to do anything without consensus at the management level. Anyhow, what I did, and I made one of the biggest mistakes in my career, is I audited a meeting they had where they discussed the crisis of the day, right? So I'm in this meeting, I'm auditing it. I have one of my undergraduates that I brought along to help me. We're auditing the meeting, we're recording it, we're going to transcribe it, we're going to learn from it. And in the meeting, they're discussing this emergency. All of a sudden, about halfway through the meeting, the president gets up, points to me and says, "Robert, what would you do?" what would you do to fix this? And I'm looking, well, I'd sort of analyze it and write you a report and come back next week. No, they wanted me to, on the spot, tell them what I'd do. And so I basically did this. I said, well, this is an emergency project. I would do this as a pilot for Scrum. And I described to him how I would take all their traditional paperwork documents and use a methodology called storyboarding. It's a great way to capture Agile requirements. That's what I suggested for these guys. Basically, what they did also was they basically listened to me. I described a very nice way to do it. And then what did they do? The minute I left, they did it. But they decided to be Machiavellian. So they basically just told everybody, hey, tomorrow you're on a Scrum team. Like, without even telling them what is Scrum, they just put them on a team. And without any training, they decided to wing it. And this was really awful, of course. The testing team was very uncomfortable. They had to learn how to do exploratory testing. People spent tons of overtime, which wasn't the point. The product management was not active and not involved and didn't really like what was going on. And so the whole thing was treated ultimately by the developers as a heroic effort, which is what they liked doing. So in the end, what we did is we had to let them fail. By the way, they had an iteration that they said it was a sprint, but it took like 6 weeks to do. So it was very long, you know. So the other thing we suggested to do afterwards, active product management, consolidate all those backlogs into one document, train people in the method a bit, you know, involve testers in planning, yes, please. Teach people different testing techniques that make sense in Agile contexts, like exploratory testing. Teach the developers how to consistently use the unit testing framework, because it was inconsistent before. Teach people how to use stories for requirements, because that was very, very foreign concept to them. And basically also commit the team. And this management, I had to tell this management, for the iteration, keep the team together. Because there was this tension to pull people off for all these emergencies. Anyhow, so that's the second story. And it did work out in the end. And what was really shocking to me in the end was once they got good at it, they sold the company. And that was the president's whole idea. He didn't really want all those products out the door. He wanted the team to be able to respond well to changes so that the value of the company went up and someone else bought them and merged them into another company. So we increased the value of the company. They didn't tell me that was the goal, by the way, because that was a big dark secret. You know. This is the case of the graceful goose. The goal here was to dramatically improve quality. Before this transition, before the Agile transition, they were suffering from the tyranny of the urgent. So there was always this urgent project that took priority over everything. We're going to put the university in the cloud, so everything else has to follow the cloud project. There was an inconsistent amount of unwieldy documentation. Projects were interrupted. The company was actually losing market share and had recently been through a corporate merger. Surprisingly, is a success story, surprisingly. So they identified champions and they trained organizational leaders to be, so they start with the leader layer, product owners, development leads, and test leads. This is interesting. So they really identified key people and they wanted these roles. Now they're violating Scrum a bit. They're going to use a Scrum variant, but they still had like test leads and dev leads. So this is an interesting breakdown. They also trained team members using internal and external training. And the nice thing is the external training gets them started, but what they wanted to do is develop internal training so that the teams can work and teach each other. Then they used this Machiavellian approach again, this comes up a lot, where each business unit immediately implemented the change with no choice. So there was none of this progressive stuff. Everybody had to change at once. And this was very painful. There was no different time frame for different projects. So they didn't do a pilot, see what works, and then phase it in. They used, at the beginning, a philosophy of documentation called barely adequate documentation. They created just enough documentation and no more. This was a mistake, by the way. They should have done the opposite. They should have created just a bit more document than they need, not a bit less. Because if you do less than you need, you'll never be able to recover what's not there. If you do more than you need, well, then you can trim off the fat later on. Anyhow, they adopted also to learn for each iteration. It was a very painful transition. And for the first few iterations, it was very hard to deliver working code. And there was way too much manual testing too late in the iteration. So there was like burnout at the last few days of the iteration, and they weren't advancing in the test automation. So the solution to this, and it was, I think, quite correctly done, management went and said, okay, let's make test automation a high priority backlog issue. And they got all the product owners and said, we don't care, we want test automation so that we can have regression confidence. And if we don't have regression confidence, we're never going to get any of this Agile stuff going. So they put a strong emphasis on automation, and that slowed down productivity at first. So you slow down for a few sprints so that you can really dramatically speed up later. It takes nerves of steel to do this. They eliminated bug reporting almost completely. There was a lot of paperwork on bug reporting. They figured out a way to do a real minimalistic type of bug reporting. They also tried to figure out methods to learn from other teams. And this you can do. Once you have many teams doing Scrum at the same time, you could do Scrum of Scrums, which is multiple. Every day the Scrum Masters meet with the other Scrum Masters for people doing related technology. But also, you can have people audit and sit in on other people's retrospectives. So you can have a member of your team sit on some other team's retrospective, and you get ideas to cross-pollinate across teams. So they learned, basically took institutional learning from the mistakes they were making, and they've spread it very nicely. They also started the integration Scrum that I mentioned earlier. These guys actually did it. So every once in a while, they had an integration Scrum. And this was the organization they came up with, and I really loved this organization. So they have different product development teams. Then they had what they called a suite of products that worked well together. So for these different teams, they had a suite-level product manager and a suite-level architect. So this is now not in Scrum, man. This is like their variant that they came up with. And then each team had a product manager, that would be the product owner role, architects, developers, test leads, and tech writers in each of the different teams. And they're guided by suite-level product management because they had to synchronize work across different areas. Anyhow, they basically manage things in product suite area, and it took a lot of stuff. It's hybrid. I call this the Acme case study. There's a document describing it in detail in my Dropbox, and I think it's a brilliant variant of Scrum. It's not perfect. It's dogma. Doesn't work. So last point in my last minute here, before I get kicked out of the university. So different people have different suggestions on how to get to Scrum. So Kelly Waters, in her book about the subject, says, start with your requirements. Get your backlog in order. Learn how to estimate the backlog. Clean up the requirements. Learn how to do sprint planning. Create workspaces that are collaborative. Sprints, so start sprinting. Have stand-up meetings, burn down charts, get to done, review, reflect, repeat. It's, I think, good to start with the requirements. I agree with that. Everything else, I still believe in piloting. Another implementation guide says begin with training, build the teams, train the owners. That's not the afterthought. That's actually early. Train the owners. Choose a Scrum Master, especially a Scrum Master who's used to coaching people into doing Scrum, and implement and adapt as you go. So thank you for being so patient with me. You have my business card there. Send me an email, and I will reply with a series of links to my Dropbox with all my examples and case studies in detail, including copies of the slides and anything else you might need. And feel free then to correspond with me. All of my workshops and presentations always come with a lifetime guarantee. My life, not yours, right? But it only works if you ask me questions, and I'm honored to and happy to reply, give you ideas, and point you to where you might find insights into your problem space. Thank you so much.